9:30. A couple of people are probably still trickling in, so I'll wait a minute for attendance. I didn't have time yet to grade your discussion board, so I'll do that later in the week. I had changed the due date to last night because a couple of people had asked for extensions. So if you haven't done it yet, there's still a little time to do it. I won't penalize you. So try to get to it if you haven't. I haven't looked at them yet, so I don't know how many people have done it. Are there any questions yet about anything? The schedule or anything else?
I have a question. You said for extra credit, you want us to take selfies while we're at the event
Oh
for
yeah,
tomorrow?
well, yeah. If you attend that thing, the career fair. Yeah, I forgot about that. The career fair on the 30th. That's tomorrow. At 11:30 to 2, I think it is, or 2:30.
Yeah, 2:30. Yeah.
Yeah, try to get there. I'm not sure what companies are going to be there, but he's had some really good companies in the past. And if you take a selfie, you don't have to take three. I think that's obsessive. But take a selfie. That was a good idea. It's not something I ever would have thought of. And I guess just send it to me. I don't know what he wanted. He wanted you to upload it somewhere. I don't know why, but I'll be glad to give you some extra credit if you do attend. I think I said 5 points. So yeah, please do. And I think the thing is at Subo. Excellent. I think the thing is at Subo. So are you thinking of going? It was Syed.
Yeah, I was actually going to attend.
Yeah, good. It's a great
Yes.
place, incidentally, if you want to do I think I'd assigned like an informational interview exercise in this class. If I have, I get my classes mixed up because I have a couple that I assigned it in, a couple I didn't. But basically, if you could do informational interviews there, and that'll, and you talk about it's a great place to network. So you can meet people from these companies and see if you like them, and get their LinkedIn information, and communicate with them. It's a great opportunity. So I'm not sure why it is. Andre often complains. He comes to my class, my 3200 class, every year, every semester, and he always complains that there's too few students taking advantage of this stuff. I know a lot of you work and so on, and maybe you're past the point where you want a new career. Although I would guess that most of you are in school because you do want to move forward, move to a higher level. And that's a great place to further that end. So, yeah, do take a selfie, and that's a great idea. And then they don't have to take attendance for me. And I hope everybody attends. Okay, any other questions about that or anything else at this point?
W-
So we've made a lot of
We can email
progress.
it to you, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Sorry
just email
about
it
just
to
one more
me. Yeah.
question.
I don't know if
Uh,
there's any
no
reason why he
worries. Thank you.
wanted you to upload it. He may have some thing he'll do for you if you upload it to his thing, but um, for me, it's just as easy to just email it, and I'll give you the credit. Any
Okay.
other questions at this point? Okay, so I will take attendance. Oh, why only 19 now? What happened? Um, okay, so today is the 29th, and Syed Abbas, you would just ask me a question, so I guess you're here.
Yeah.
Syed Ahmad. Samima Akhtar. Alessandro Alessi.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. David Batesh.
Yeah.
David's not here. Okay. Anam Bahati. Melissa Calixto.
Good morning.
Good morning, Melissa. Winston Chan.
Good morning, Professor.
Hello, sir. Bin Chen. Kai Chen.
Here.
Hello. Jirui Deng. Farhan Aram.
Here, good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Brianna Faustin.
Here.
Hello. Steve Feng.
Here.
Jonathan Gonzalez.
Here.
Hello. June Grant. June. Ming Hao Hu. Angelica. Jian Lin.
Here.
Hello. Leon Liu.
Here, Professor. Good morning.
Good morning. Elizabeth Maddox.
Good morning.
Good morning. Rochelle Mendez. Demi Mullings. Cameron Nahar. Nicholas Neglia.
Here.
Hello. Aquino. Oh, maybe I haven't admitted people. Let me see. Weird. Let me. Oh, there's a lot in the waiting room. All right, that was my bad. Aquino Olivier. Jenny Perfecto. Jenny. Chenille Powell. Anna Siddiqui.
Good morning, Professor.
Anna. Mwinjin.
Here.
Hello. Jaren. Yi Wen. Kristen Yip. Kristen.
Hi, good morning,
Good
Professor.
morning. Good morning. Anita.
Here.
Hello. Shinran dropped the class. Let me just delete that. All right, so a number of people came in. So let me. Syed Ahmad. Samima Akhtar. David Batesh.
Hi, good morning, Professor.
Anam Bahati. Bin Chen.
Here.
Hello. Jirui Den. June Grant. Ming Hao Hu. Angelica Laborde. Rochelle Mendez.
Here.
Demi Mullings.
There.
Hello, Cameron Nahar, Aquino Olivier, Jenny Perfecto.
Here.
Hello, Chenille Powell, Jaron Walls, and Yiwen Wu. Okay, all right, I'll keep this open. Probably a few more people will trickle in. Okay, so basically today we're going to finish up the conversation about communication. Last time I was saying, and I think this is one of the more important points from from what I have to say about this, is that communication is most important in the form of listening. Listening is the most important thing. Giving your opinion is a nice thing, and it's good to communicate with people, but listening is the half that often gets overlooked, and we really need to keep it in the forefront of our minds. So basically, most of us are bad listeners, and we tend to experience listener burnout. And I think, I know I have a shtick about cell phones, but basically, these smartphones, I think, really distract people and make it hard to pay attention. And I think what you watched in The Social Dilemma kind of explains why. I mean, it's not just an artifact of the technology. They want you to be kind of disoriented because that makes you easier to manipulate when you're that way. So anyway, does anyone have any thoughts about the film? Anyone want to volunteer any thoughts there? Brianna? Anyone? All right. Well, listening is highly important. And one of the tools that I talked about last time to encourage better listening is active listening. That's listening where we actively engage and then respond. And active listening improves our focus, and it lets the other person know that we support what they're saying. And that's very important. One of the ways that we engage in active listening is reflective responses. So the idea of reflective responses is that you acknowledge what the other party's saying, but you do it in a way that doesn't intrude on the flow of what they're talking about. So you let them know you're listening, that you agree, or at least you are sympathetic. And in different cultures, there's different elements of this kind of thing. But I think Americans are not that great at listening. In the 1950s, there was a book about the guy that it was a fictional account of the guy who ultimately might have been like the CIA field operative who started the Vietnam War. McNamara doesn't mention him, but there were like ground people in Vietnam in the 1950s, and they were kind of playing a role in encouraging U.S. involvement. And basically, the name of the book was called The Ugly American. And the term has often been used to kind of connote a lack of sympathy to other cultures. And basically the problem has often found its way into business. And back in the 90s, somebody put together this email that listed out like 150 times that businesses screwed up their advertising in other countries. And a lot of the reason was they never bothered to learn the language and didn't understand the culture. You know, one of the classic ones is that in Spanish, nova means nova, don't go, doesn't go. And the Chevy Nova was being advertised in Latin America very heavily, and it turned into a joke. And it hadn't occurred to GM to have the ads or the product name reviewed, and these kinds of errors were made repeatedly by U.S. businesses, and it's been a real problem in international business that Americans haven't always been good at hearing what the markets they were selling to wanted. On the other hand, a lot of people have wanted U.S. products. I mean, I'm not condemning U.S. business. One example is the blue jeans, and during the USSR, during the Soviet period, blue jeans became a real fad, and they were being smuggled into the Soviet Union, but in huge amounts. I knew this Polish guy who was telling me how he was running like 10,000 pairs of blue jeans a week, surreptitiously. And basically, these kind of products have often been in demand, but I think that's led to an arrogance that needs to be thought through more carefully, and Americans need to be better at listening. And we all do. I mean, so one way to do that in one-to-one conversations is reflective listening. I also talked about last time the limitations of electronic communication, that email and texting is not information rich. And so, like, as we've become better at communicating en masse, we've become worse at the emotional content. And Stephen Covey talks about this a lot in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that relationships are like bank accounts, and you need to make deposits in order to make withdrawals. If you make withdrawals without making deposits, you close the account. So basically, the way you do that is in large part by developing relationships through in-person meetings, which are appropriate when you have any kind of conflict, when there are emotional issues, when you need to talk about goals. I would say anytime you're afraid to have an in-person meeting is the very time you should have an in-person meeting. So, like, a lot of the phobia and fear people have about informational interviewing is in this category. So basically, in order to get a good job, you need to make contacts. I was just reading this crazy book about the Bush family called Family of Secrets, and he talks a lot about the people around the Bush family, both H.W. and George W. And a lot of people, he goes through a lot of people, and his point is to kind of, the guy that wrote it, Russ Baker's point is to kind of show the ugly underbelly of the Bush family, which is fine. But what he also shows you is that a huge number of people made a lot of money through connections, including the Bushes. And it was everything that was done in their world was because somebody knew somebody, and they spent their whole lives, they spent all their time building connections in places like Saudi Arabia with the oil, and they became friends with these people, and these oil, the Saudi royal family, and basically became far more wealthy than they would have been through these connections. And the reverse was true too. And then, the other side of it was that, like, when they needed help from people, they would often make these people rich by, putting them in businesses and things like that. And in turn, these people would profit dramatically, but also be helping the Bushes. It was a two-way street. So, basically a lot of life is like that. I'm not saying you should do corrupt stuff and so on. That's not my message, but rather that you should develop long-term relationships and build your business activities on these connections. And if you're not making such connections, you got to ask yourself, am I doing what I need to do to get where I want to go? I mean, it may be you are, it may be you don't care, you don't want to be the Bushes or, whoever. But basically, you got to ask yourself, am I doing enough in that area? And I think a large part of the problem is fear of rejection. This is central to why people don't get ahead in life. If you want to be safe, you're not going to win. You'll avoid loss. So, like, people who focus on loss avoidance, you find a little niche and you stay in it, and you never get hurt, but you don't do extremely well. And then maybe some envy creeps in, and you say, well, why did somebody else do really well? It must be because they're dishonest. I've had students in this semester say, anyone who's a billionaire is dishonest, and that's patently not true. I mean, there are many honest billionaires, and I'm not saying all are, but there are a lot of dishonest poor people. The fact that somebody's a billionaire doesn't, I would say, makes them more honest, not less. I would expect more of a billionaire than of an average person. The reason is that an average person doesn't need to sustain long-term relationships. So if you're in the habit of screwing other people, you're not going to have a lot of long-term relationships. But a billionaire does need a lot of long-term relationships. So basically, if you're in the habit of screwing people, you're going to have trouble maintaining long-term relationships. That's not to say that people like the Bushes, who are not billionaires, the Bushes weren't billionaires, but they're very wealthy, though. There's no question. But there are dishonest elements to what they did. There's no question there either. But I don't think the most successful people are necessarily dishonest. Not everyone who's that successful or more successful is like the Bushes. David Geffen, for example, Brooklyn College, he didn't graduate. He went to the college for a year, became the most dominant rock manager and rock record label owner and music industry magnate. He's number 93 on the Forbes 400 now, and basically he did it by treating people well, and that's often the case. And Mike Bloomberg, who I've never met, but my sister worked for him directly, so I've heard a lot about him, was also very, very honest guy, and treated people well. And when my sister was pregnant, he put a large amount of money in her bank account and told her to take a year off. He was a very decent guy, and basically, such people are often successful. So you can have a mentality where you think of an expanding pie, and you develop relationships that help you expand the pie. And this is what, another example is James Goodnight of SAS, the statistical software company. And he was famous for saying, I watch my best assets drive out of the parking lot every night. And my job is to make sure they drive back the next day. And so the way he does that is by treating them really well. Of course, not all businesses are like music and statistical software, which require highly talented people. You know, in the case of Geffen, he was dealing with famous rock stars. In the case of Goodnight, he's dealing with mathematicians and computer geeks and so on, people who are designing statistical software that's used by PhDs and master's degree holders to strategize business planning and do research in universities. And, you know, these are very, very high level employees who, of course, have to be treated well. But I think businesses need to learn about this, because I was just approached by one of the financial websites, Wallet Hub, that's called, to comment on why the high employee turnover right now. And a lot of it is that the very, very few firms have thought the way Geffen and James Goodnight have, and haven't listened to the employees and don't support the employees and don't have HR practices that are special for the employees. So basically, you want to use communication methods that are appropriate to the type of communication that you're using. So in-person meetings are appropriate when you need to discuss conflict, goals, emotional issues. There's back and forth needed. People have expectations. You gauge reciprocity. You gauge other people's receptiveness to your claims. There's back and forth. You need to resolve conflict. You need to discuss goals. Phone calls are most appropriate when you need something done fast. There's extensive verbal explanation required, and impressions need to be managed. Texts are appropriate when you need to share a thought and process. You need a quick comment. There's no real debate. You just want to let people know things. There's brief additional information that you're offering. There's multiple collaboration. And emails are appropriate if you need to contact multiple people, if you are sharing formal documentation, if you are giving official approval. So basically, barriers to communication, I would say the biggest one is lack of listening. But there's also the problem of information overload. We get so many emails now. There's so much information available on the web that we don't know what to look for. Another problem is communication apprehension, which I was really just talking about, that people experience undue tension or anxiety surrounding their communication with others. In crises, sharing of information works best. So in crises, you want to do the opposite of what people instinctively do. And so basically, in the case of a crisis, there's a tendency for people to become rigid, to take control. And instead, what you want to do is share ideas and open up conversation. And so you want to share information and cooperate in the case of crisis. Channel richness refers to the amount of information that can be communicated in an episode. And basically, you want to use the richest possible method given the number of people to whom you want to communicate. And so basically, the best way is in person, but the problem with in-person communication is that it's expensive, that you need to go to a place and meet with someone, it's one-on-one, and people often don't have enough time. So the temptation is to do everything by Zoom. And if you're far away, it's probably the best option. The trouble is, Zoom is not information rich. I see in my class that there's much less involvement when you're remote. And so basically, the richness is largely lost in Zoom. I'm not saying completely, but I think maybe 40% or 50% lost. And so in person is much better, especially if there's something very sensitive that you want to talk about. Things like emails and texting are much worse. In between is, say, telephone and voicemail, which you can share some information, but it's not as good for the simple reason that you don't have the nonverbal communication, both things like body language and also the tone of voice is not as clearly understood in telephones, and even Zoom people don't hear quite as well. All right, so basically, one of the huge changes that you are going to be dealing with in your careers is the transformation of learning. I think we're going to see increasing amounts of learning through internet, and there's going to be much more e-learning in the form of podcasts and interactive internet contexts. So in other words, people are going to interact online. I think I mentioned last time I attended a Tony Robbins seminar that lasted for 4 days, and he had 40,000 people online at once. Obviously, he made a lot of money. He charged each one $100, $500. So, multiply that by 40,000, and that's what his fee was for that thing. Of course, he has a staff and technical people, and he has to pay people and stuff. But still, I mean, the profit margin on something like that is astronomical. And a lot of people now are making huge amounts of money through podcasts and e-education, e-training of various kinds, coaching, selling, consulting advice through recorded lessons. In other words, you can if you have some advice to give to people in a given field, like say plumbers, or to teachers or something, you can sell the podcast. So you record the advice and then you sell the podcast for some money, and if it's really useful, a lot of people will get it, and you can make good money. So this kind of approach, I think, is the wave of the future. And this idea of stackable credentials, where you get certifications in within the field that you're interested in, rather than a degree. And basically, the idea is that stackable credentials create a coherent pathway. And the reason for it is that knowledge changes so rapidly now. I don't think in a field like this it does, but it changes rapidly in tech and other things that many of you will be dealing with. And so if you educate someone in year one and then they graduate in year four, by year four, the stuff they learned in year one is out of date. So rather than try to accomplish the impossible, what firms are now asking for is like a credential that's quick to learn, that's relatively short term, and that will enable you to be up to date in the technology. So I think these kinds of technologies, e-learning technologies, are going to explode. one approach that colleges have tried and that's had some popular success is massive open online courses or MOOCs, where professors at a given university record their lectures and it's downloaded to lots of people. But I don't think that's the ultimate use of this. I think it's going to be a lot more targeted, and there's going to be a lot more entrepreneurship in this area. As well, I mean, you all know, I mean, I really don't have to talk about it because we're doing it right now, is e-collaboration. So Microsoft Teams and Google Workspace, Zoom allows for people to collaborate online, so you don't have to do things in person. You have to face the fact that we are increasingly living in a surveillance society, and e-technology lends itself to surveillance. Part of this is the widespread use of social media that you looked at the time of the textbooks writing is probably beyond this now. 45% of the world's population was using social media, and 68% of those were using Facebook. And users were spending 6 hours a day. So it's become, in my generation, it was television. In your generation, it's TikTok, I guess. And, I think part of the problem there is the surveillance. You have to be, I don't have to tell you this probably, but a lot of people have been hurt by that they post stuff online, and it takes on a life of its own. And if you're not careful, so in my case, I don't really care what, I'm close to retiring, and I don't really care what employers think. I don't care about getting another job or anything. So, but I mean, I know a guy who got into trouble at his college, and they fired him. Basically, he was a dean, and a lot of it was communication linked. It wasn't online stuff, but it was related to communication, how he communicates. And basically, we live in a world where anything you do online is going to be recorded and will be retained. And so they will find it. And most of them look. So I would say the less you put out there, the better. And you should only, except for things that you're consciously putting out there to further your career. So the only social media presence I personally would have, I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't look at it, but I wouldn't post things. The only ones I would have if I were you are things that you've put out there to let people know that you're marketing yourself. So in other words, everything you do online should be a form of personal marketing. And, there shouldn't be anything real on there. It should all, when I say not real, I mean not related to the way you want to present yourself in a professional setting. So things that you wouldn't say publicly, you shouldn't put up there. And basically, this is a real paradox, because they give smartphones and this kind of technology give people a sense of autonomy, but they really reduce autonomy. So they make you feel like you're in control, but you've actually got less control. And I think part of that is the inability to listen. So like people have trouble following what other people say because speech is slower. It's quicker to see things on the cell phone, but there's no continuity on the cell phone. So the process of logical thought doesn't proceed. It's lost. And so mentally, it causes people to become scattered. And the result is that it controls you instead of you controlling it. And basically, the smartphone, as you saw in your film that you wrote your discussion board on has been followed by decreased happiness among high school students for the last 11 years. So there are advantages and disadvantages. Studies have found that smartphone use retards emotional maturation. Late night smartphone use has been shown to reduce work engagement. One hypothesis is that social media usage has led to less reflective and more rapid thought that results in shallow evaluations. I think that's eminently true. I've detected this for a number of years now. Not that people were especially smart in the past, but the trend has been away from smart. So basically, social media is in many ways constructive, and I don't think we could do without it at this point. And I think smartphones are productive, and I don't think we can do without them at this point. Social media can certainly enhance network building, and LinkedIn is good for that. It can enhance shared cognition. And it's obviously changing advertising, it's changing marketing, it's changing networking. It basically affects how you manage your image. And so a lot of what you need to think about in looking for a job, if you read, going back 20 years or close to it, if you look at the book, What Color is Your Parachute, which a new edition comes out every year. So by 2000, Bowles was editing the book to say that your resume is now online. And, I don't know the exact year he started saying this, but for the last 10 or 15 years, he's been saying, Google is your new resume. I think that's going to change because I think Google is being surpassed and will be replaced. But basically, your resume is as much a product of your online presence as your paper and electronic resume. And so you need to build an online presence that leads to the kind of work you want to do. And that's a lot to think about. So what I'm saying is that you need to network on that level as well as the interpersonal level. Of course, there's no substitute for in-person meetings. If somebody sees your resume or sees something that makes them want to get to know you, they can contact you, and then the result will ultimately be an in-person meeting. If there's no in-person meeting, it could be the entire thing is online. Increasingly, Zoom is replacing, and a lot of firms now are all over the country. Somebody asked me to write something the other day, and he lives in he works for a group that I am associated with that's based in Manhattan, the National Association of Scholars, but he lives in Texas. So, I said, when he contacted me, I said, why don't we have lunch? We can talk about what you want me to write. And he said, oh no, I live in Texas now. So he works for a Manhattan company full time, but he's in Texas. And my accountant had the same story. In fact, the only reason I was able to meet the guy who did my taxes last year was that I happened to go on vacation in Las Vegas, where he lives. But the accountant is my friend I grew up with, who lives on Long Island, but his employees are all over the country, and we're increasingly seeing this. So where this is all going is that more and more communication is going to be online, more and more communication is going to be through artificial intelligence. I don't know where ultimately that leads. I think if history is a guide, it won't mean what a lot of people think will happen. And I've heard this many times, is that artificial intelligence is so powerful that it's going to replace all the jobs, and people are going to be unemployed, and like all the people who do knowledge work but don't do work that's creative in any sense. In other words, they you're a lawyer, but all you do is fill out legal forms, or do some kind of rote transactional work. That type of employee will be replaced, and I think that's probably true. But that's always been true, and we haven't seen a reduction in employment. If I'll show you a graph. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, I guess this comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yeah, it's actually the Bureau of Labor Statistics that collects the data, but the trend is clearly available from Fred, Federal Reserve, something or other. I don't know. St. Louis Fed, Federal Reserve, something, ED. I'll have to find that out. But basically, this is the labor force participation rate, and it's the percentage of people over age 16 who aren't institutionalized who are working. So it includes retirees and it includes students. And what you've seen is, like, in the 60s, it was like 58%. Okay. And the percentage of stay-at-home moms was going down. So more women entering the workforce. But I think more importantly than that was the baby boomer generation was entering the workforce. And so this went up. The percentage of people working went up over time. And what we've seen since is that the boomers are retiring. So that started in the mid-90s. The first boomer reached age 55 in around 1955. I'm sorry, 1995. So you saw a flattening of the growth of labor force participation. And then a little before 2000, when the first boomers the earliest boomers were starting to reach their 60s, you started to see a decline. So a lot of this is demographic. And so the labor force participation rate has declined significantly. All right. And that means that there are fewer people out there working. Now, what that has caused is in part what we've seen recently with labor shortages in a lot of areas. So especially things like trucking and healthcare and other stressful jobs. Nursing is one, especially emergency room nursing has seen a lot of turnover and quits and stuff. And part of the reason is that people are retiring, baby boomers are retiring. And so what that does is it opens up more jobs. And I don't think the technological changes are going to change that. A lot of people are retiring and there's going to be more job opportunities. But I think the kind of job opportunities will be a lot different and higher level. And unfortunately, what that may mean is that there's going to be more income inequality. I'm sorry to say that. But basically, if you need high-tech skills in order to do well, that means that you need to pursue a lot of learning, and not everyone can do that. And so the people that are good, on the other hand, I think there's going to be a trend away from the kind of communication I'm doing now, classroom education. I think what you're going to start to see, and you have started to see, is that places are going to be a lot more careful about the kinds of credentials they require because of labor shortages. And so you're going to see more careful employee selection. I mean, if markets have anything to say about it, you will, because such processes improve the quality of hires and result in longer term employment. If you get good fit, we talked about this. If there's a good person organization fit, the person is going to stay with the firm longer, and so firms need to think more carefully about how they hire people, and they haven't done that. The firms have been remiss. Only about the process of assessing employee fit would go through a validation process. Validation means that you test the hires and see what selection methods you used and whether they predicted long-term employment and good performance ratings. And so basically the methods used to make decisions about hiring haven't been validated, haven't been tested against actual outcomes where people stay or go, and that's used to determine whether the selection method is useful. And the method that most firms have used is informal job interviews, and they don't work that well. And so basically now what they're seeing is rapid turnover in a lot of fields because they don't have people who fit the job requirements well. Cultures differ a lot in terms of communication. There's a lot of great work that's been done on cross-cultural differences. And okay, the waiting room. Yeah, I think I took care of that already. Okay, so there are a lot of people who there's been a lot of good work done on cross-cultural differences, and basically the guy who did that work is a guy named Geert Hofstede, and he wrote a book called Culture's Consequences. And he argued in there that there were 4, and then it was extended to 5 cultural differences: individualism versus collectivism, what he called masculinity versus femininity, which in part can refer to task orientation versus relations orientation, and can also refer to other kinds of gender differences, and as well power distance, which means how authoritarian the culture is. So like there are some countries where a high degree of authority and centralization are desired. In other cultures, there's much less so, and there's less respect for authority. And then the final one is risk taking or uncertainty avoidance, which would be the reverse. If you avoid uncertainty, obviously you're not risk taking. And so basically cultures differ, and part of that is also learning styles, and there are probably cultural differences in learning styles as well, that intersect with these cultural differences, and we all differ a little as to the way that we learn. Some people learn more by communicating verbally, other people learn more by reading, some people learn by experimenting. Some people like to learn in groups and do stuff in groups. Other people prefer a more individualistic approach. And so basically all of this stuff will affect how you communicate. If you go to, I once taught in China, and the students did everything as a group. There was much more group orientation than here. And that's entirely consistent with cultural differences between the US and China. And so the way that we learn, the way that we communicate, some cultures, another book I should mention in this regard is Ruth Benedict's The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. Which was a study of the Japanese in the US during the Second World War. So in other words, she was commissioned to do a study in the middle of the war because they realized there was a possibility that we would invade Japan. As it turned out, we bombed Japan and then occupied it. And I think what we were interested in, what the reason that the Roosevelt administration commissioned her to study this was that they were afraid of terrorists and other, violent responses. Here in the US, if you know the story of Jesse James, the famous bank robber, he was basically a domestic terrorist who was fighting the Civil War after it ended. And you could easily have similar things elsewhere. So they wanted to see whether that would occur. And she did this intensive, really amazing anthropological study. She was an anthropologist associated with Margaret Mead, who's often considered the founder of modern anthropology. And Ruth Benedict wrote this incredible book about the Japanese based on interviews she did. And you probably know that the Roosevelt administration committed a grievous crime against the Japanese by incarcerating them in concentration camps during the war. That was wrong. I mean, we were fighting a vicious war with Japan, but it wasn't with them. They were Americans, so it was completely inappropriate. And so basically, she was interviewing these people in concentration camps, but she was able to get enough who were still embedded in the Japanese culture that she could get a clear idea of it. And she wrote this remarkable book about how the ethical systems of the Confucian cultures and the Western cultures are very different. And basically, then communication style will be different, and the extent of collectivism will be different, and the weight put on losing face will be different in the different cultures. And so one of the kinds of differences is that in high context cultures there are nonverbal and subtle cues, whereas in low context cultures people tend to rely more on word meaning. I would assume that's partially related to task and relations orientation. In other words, what Hofstede called masculinity and femininity. But I don't have any evidence of that. I'm just intuiting from the meanings. And so the USA, Australia, and Germany are low context, and Germany has the most high in masculinity. I told my wife that, who lived in Germany most of her life, and she was like stunned. She didn't believe it, but it's true. So the USA, Australia, and Germany are low context, whereas Japan and Saudi Arabia are high context. And that's also, I think that's also related to collectivism. So basically, face-to-face communication is in high context cultures is going to be more important. And so they're going to put more weight on shared, understanding the body language and things like that, the subtleties in the communication. Probably that's also related to like the importance. What one of the things that Benedict talked about was shame-based versus guilt-based cultures. And the idea of a shame-based culture is that people base their actions and their moral feelings on embarrassment, on losing face. Whereas in guilt-based cultures, it's conscience that plays a bigger role. And I would guess that a lot of the reason that cultures are high context is that people don't want to say things that cause others to lose face. So people look more to the nonverbal communication. So basically, face-to-face communication is most important in high context cultures. The situation then is important in cross-cultural communication. You need to be careful and to assess other people's reactions when you're communicating cross-culturally, because there's often misunderstanding. You can say things that are completely misunderstood. And I have a friend who has close friends in Sweden, and he's been there many times. This isn't a professor, it's a guy I know where I live. And he told me that he had these very close friends that he was visiting for many weeks, and he once made some comment, and the wife blew up at him. She started screaming at him that he was saying the wrong thing, and the reason was that she just didn't understand what he was saying. It was just a complete misunderstanding, and this is often going to happen in cross-cultural communication. So you have to be careful, because things can become strained, and so you have to adjust what you say to the context. Increasingly, our world is global, despite the recent trend toward, which I think is unfortunate, towards protectionism and increased trade barriers. We still live in an increasingly global world, and I saw this in the Tony Robbins thing. I was like stunned at how global it was. I mean, and all these people speak English. It's like amazing to me. People in every country really are participating in this. They're all interested in learning this material, and it was in every country and every culture, and basically they were all speaking English. I was floored. But nevertheless, despite this, a communication is improved through a higher context setting. You want to decide what kind of approach to interaction you have when you communicate cross-culturally. And one of these, and I think this is the kind that Tony Robbins would use, is synergizing or collaborating, which means that the whole is made to be greater than the sum of the parts. And he does this through a great deal of creating a team spirit, camaraderie, excitement, physical activity, and a hyped up mental state that causes people to want to collaborate and learn together. Another approach would be to compromise across cultural differences. A third approach would be to avoid conflict and minimize the amount of communication. Another approach would be to embrace or accommodate the other culture. And lastly, to impose on the other side and try to compete or force your point of view. I'm sorry to say that it's way too frequent that the US engages in this kind of imposing and competing mentality. I had a friend who was the former president of Bendix International, which was a large company that later got taken over, I forget by whom. I'm just Googling it. Bendix was taken over by Allied Corp, now known as Allied Signal, and then became part of Honeywell. So these things merge all the time. And there's all kinds of aviation stuff that these people make. And so he's the president of the international division of Bendix. And he came to my class. I invited him to my class to talk. And the first thing he said to them, which I thought was completely wrong, is that Americans don't need to learn other languages. And I know why he said it. I just told you why he's right, because Tony Robbins, is able to attract 40,000 people from all over the world to listen to his to his Zoom seminar. And they all speak different languages, but they all speak English too. But I think it's completely wrong in mentality to say that if you do business in another country, you shouldn't start educating yourself as to their language and learning about the culture and the language. And language, I don't think you can talk about culture unless you learn a language. So basically, I think American business has been remiss. And I'm preaching to the choir here because most of you are multilingual, which I'm not really. I mean, I've studied German and I've studied Spanish. But I'm far from fluent in either. And, my wife is sometimes surprised when I start talking to her in German because that's her main language. And she says she better be careful about talking about me because I do know a little, but basically I'm not. And yet I think it's extremely important in business, if you're going to do business in a new country for any sustained period, that you need to take the time to learn how to do it. And, I told them after I didn't agree with them. But basically, there's always a high risk of violating cultural norms and taboos when you do business in another country. You see that sometimes politicians do things like this, and you need to really educate yourself when you're doing business overseas and have training in your company. I once had an IBM exec speak to my class when I taught back many, many years ago. I taught at Iona College in Westchester. And I had a senior marketing person from IBM, and she gave a nice talk to my class. And one of the things I asked her was, to what extent did she get training before she went to the country she went to? And she had gone to many countries, like several dozen. And she said, even though she'd been all over the world, Asia, South Africa, South America, everywhere, she had never once received training in the culture or how to communicate And I think that's a serious mistake. And that's, I think the Japanese have been better at that than we have. And that's why they've often beat us in global competition. Uh, Basically, things like understanding the tone, understanding responses, understanding the extent to which people from different cultural contexts are comfortable with conflict, understanding the values is important when you do any kind of international business and when you do any kind of cross-cultural communication. So this is a really huge issue. I don't know how many of you are thinking of pursuing a career in international business. I would say it's probably a great area to think about, cross-national trade. And those of you who are multilingual, I think too often people don't view that as a marketable skill. And if you're able to communicate well across the 2 or 3 countries, I think you can parlay that into a lot of opportunity. So that's something to think about. And I too often don't hear students. I don't think I hardly ever hear students when they talk about their goals say, well, I want to go into international business and set up an import-export business or set up some kind of cross-training or something like that between the 2 countries I'm familiar with. And I think that's a real loss. I think people should be thinking about that because I think that's part of where things are going. Okay, so basically, we're almost out of time. And if anyone has any questions, you still have time to do the discussion.
Professor, did you take my attendance?
Yes, hold on, Ming Hao, I'll check. Let's see. Okay, I got you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a
Professor,
question?
can you take mine?
You are, who are you?
Samima.
Samima Akhtar. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Professor, can you check me too? Brianna Foster.
Gotcha. I had you already.
All right, thank you.